as we begin our week. And we're interested in kicking off this finance meeting. And I think, Chad, you are the chairman of this, are you not?
I believe so, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think
so. I'm flipping to you, sir.
I saw that on the agenda, so apparently I am the chair of this committee, and looking forward to that. Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday, and excited to hear from Mike Brossart and his team on our financial report and a few other items as well. So I think, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you and make introductions, and you guys can take it from there.
Yes, good morning. To everyone, thank you for attending on this on this Monday morning. Traditionally, we try to have the Finance Committee where you approve the annual audit during an agenda study or prior to or just after an agenda study. This year, the timing did not quite work out prior to the March 31st deadline. For that, I do apologize. We do try to coordinate those for each of you. This is an annual process where our external auditors, Crow, will present their findings of the annual audit, the comprehensive annual financial report. We're not allowed to call it the CAFR anymore. So if you have any questions throughout, John or Corinne can provide answers, and we've got Deidre on the call as well as Barbara Henry as well. So when we're done with this and Crow leaves, Jeff and I have a short little presentation, little request for some changes to our investment policy, minor changes to our investment policy. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and let John and Corinne take over, please.
Good morning. Nice to see everybody today. My name is John Weber. I'm a partner with Crow. I'm the signing engagement partner for the city's audit. Corinne is with me as well. Corinne is the manager on the engagement, and Corinne does all the hard work. So I just get all the glory in signing your audit opinions. So we have a presentation to walk through with you today, and I think Corinne, are you going to bring that up on the screen? There we go. Everybody see that okay? Great. All right, good deal. We have our technology working today. So I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. What we're going to go over with you today is a little bit of a financial statement overview, and then discuss the audit results with you. So the comprehensive annual financial report is a huge document, a couple hundred pages. So we would be here for days if I walked through that entire document with you. So what I have done is just, put some highlights on a presentation for you, so you can get kind of an overview of some of the numbers this year for the city. So this slide here, there's two graphs. The graph on the left, this is showing the statement of net position for all the governmental activities of the city, and otherwise referred to as a balance sheet. And as you can see, at September 30th, 2020, the city ended the year with about $560 million of assets, of $221 million of liabilities, and almost $339 million of what we refer to as a net position, difference between the assets and the liabilities. The graph on the right-hand side is breaking up that net position, and that is showing that $233 million roughly of that net position is what is invested in capital assets. So that would be all of the infrastructure, land, buildings, equipment that are part of the governmental activities. There's about $52 million restricted at year end. That has to do with internal and external restrictions, so that fund balance or that net position is really not available for just general type spending. You will see at year end there's an unrestricted net position that's a negative $64 million. And you may ask, wow, that's a negative net restriction or unrestricted net position. Doesn't sound that great. This is very common in government these days. And the reason being is, 3, 4, or 5 years ago, there were two standards that went into effect. And that has to do with recording a net pension liability, as well as a net OPEB liability. So those amounts for the governmental activities, the net pension liability is about $93 million at year end, and the net OPEB liabilities about $104 million. So there's $197 million of liabilities that is really causing that negative unrestricted net position. And again, these numbers are no different than any other government you're going to look at that has pension and OPEB obligations. The next slide then, showing the same information for the business type activities. So business type activities would refer to electric, water, wastewater, airport, operations like that operate as business type activities. So at year end, the assets were about $1.9 billion, liabilities about $869 million, and there was a net position of a little bit over $1 billion. That net position on the right-hand side is made up of about $735 million, which is invested in capital assets. So that's all the capital assets relating to your electric, your water, your wastewater, your airport, things of that nature. Restricted is about $34 million, and the unrestricted is a positive $113 million. Again, the net pension liability and OPEB obligations related to employees in those functions in the business type activities are allocated to those functions. And so that unrestricted net position includes about $80 million of a net pension liability, and again, about $108 million of a net OPEB liability. Okay. On the next slide, the graph on the left-hand side, this is the general fund for the city. So actual revenues in the general fund were approximately $79 million for the year. The budgeted revenues were pretty much $79 million. So pretty good job there, budgeting the revenues for the year. The variance was just under budget by about $133,000, which is, like I said, pretty good budgeting on a budget of about $79 million in the general fund for the year. Actual expenditures in the general fund were almost $159 million, and the budget was about $169 million. So you were favorable to budget on the expenditures by approximately $10 million. On the right-hand side is the some graphs for the electric utilities and then water and wastewater. So for the electric, and here we're just presenting operating revenues. So what it costs to run the operation. So this would not include interest income, interest expense, transfers, dividend payments, just the operations of those activities. So for electric, generated about $298 million of operating revenue at expenses of about $230 million, for an operating income before any transfers of about $67.8 million. And then for water and wastewater, the operating revenue was $71 million, operating expenses $47 million, for a operating income of $23.7 million. Again, this is, like I said, just a highlight of some of the financial numbers. Certainly encourage you to read through the entire comprehensive annual financial report, including in the beginning of the report, you're going to find an introductory section and a management discussion and analysis. It's great information to read to learn more about the activities of the city for the year, and some like narrative discussion versus just a bunch of numbers. So again, I highly encourage you to look at that information in the report.
It's really kind of our gross profit.
Pardon me?
I'd say it really functions as kind of our gross profit, does it not?
The Which part?
Both. When we look at those revenues short of distributions or the net income short of distributions, it's really sales minus cost of goods sold.
Correct, Mayor. Yes, exactly. Yep. Right. And again, that's before any transfers are made. So. All right, so our audit results. So we form a number of opinions on what we do. First, the audit report on the comprehensive annual financial report, as well as the Lakeland Community Redevelopment Agency, Lakeland Electric, and the Employees Pension and Retirement System for which we audit. All of those, we have unmodified audit opinions. That means the financial statements are reasonably stated in all material respects, or otherwise referred to as clean audit opinions. And as I often say, that's the best opinion you're going to get from an auditor. So congratulations to the city for that. Our opinion on the comprehensive annual financial report, if you read through that, we do reference other auditors. We do that because we do not audit the police or fire pension systems. Those are audited by other auditors, but that information is included in your comprehensive annual financial report. So we just make reference to those auditors and the work they did. We also issue an internal control and compliance report. This is done in accordance with government auditing standards. The basic premise of this is we are evaluating to determine if there's any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies or non-compliance with laws and regulations related to financial reporting. I'm happy to report to you, we did not note any material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, or non-compliance in that report. The single audit report, federal and state, here we are providing opinion on your grant funds, your federal grant funds, as well as your state of Florida grant funds. And our opinion is stating whether the city complied with laws and regulations set by the federal government as well as the state of Florida with how you're spending your grant funds. Again, it's an unmodified opinion. So that opinion will read that we've determined that the city complied in all material respects with all laws and regulations related to the grant funds that we audited during the year. With that opinion, we also need to evaluate the internal control of the city related to the spending of grant funds. And again, we had no material weaknesses, significant deficiencies in internal control, and we had no question costs related to the audit. Question costs would be if while we're auditing those grant funds, we found a disallowed cost, something that wasn't allowed under the grant agreement, that would be a question cost. And we did not have any question costs during our audit for the year. We also issue a management letter to the Florida Auditor General. They have standards we follow as well. And we did not have any comments to report to the Auditor General in that letter. So as you can see, everything's very clean. No findings, material weaknesses, all clean opinions. And certainly I want to thank Mike, Deidre, Barbara, and the entire team at the city for helping us through this process. We really start this process in December. And as you can see, we're towards the end of March when we finalize it. It's a significant amount of work and big effort, especially on the part of the city in doing their regular jobs, as well as providing us all the information we need to do our audit. So again, I'd like to thank everybody at the city for their help, and certainly would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, John, for walking us through that. And, certainly Mike and your team, it's great work. That's always encouraging and reassuring to hear clean audit, no material findings that, it's just, I think that's been a consistent pattern for many, many years. And that, takes a lot of intentional effort. So I know as a commission, hats off to you guys and your staff for your work. Any questions, comments from the commissioners? All right, going once, not twice. John, Corrine, we really appreciate your role in partnership in this. Mike, do you have anything you want to add on to this?
Yes, if I could. First, I'd like to give credit, a much deserved thank you to Deidre as well as Barbara. Henry, they have, as to John's point, they have their regular jobs to do as well as managing the audit as they have many evenings and weekends donated to the cause for good reason. But there's a great deal of credit that goes to all of the departments as well, because it's their understanding, their training, their diligence to doing the right thing when it comes to the way they purchase, the way they create purchase orders, whatever that is, they're following the rules. And so as John and Corinne and their team do their statistical analysis, they're not finding things wrong. And those aren't things that Deidre and I's coworkers are doing. Those are things that people out in the field are doing and doing properly. So credit to supervisors and their coworkers for the way they handle following the rules, draconian rules, as we're told many times. But credit to them. So thank you to John and Corinne for the way they professionally handle our process. So thank you.
And Mike, is that full report coming to us, on its way to us now?
Yes, sir. They were printed and proofed, and they should be in every of the commissioner's offices, as well as Emily and Sean should have theirs as well. So they are there. And if you have any trouble sleeping at night, I promise you, you won't get through the MD&A and you'll be sleeping like a baby.
Yeah, Commissioner, just to confirm that the hard copies have been placed in each of your offices this morning. I also want to comment that this is the first report that we've had since we transitioned to having the external auditors do the full audit. In the past, our internal audit department did an awful lot of the legwork, but we changed that in order for internal auditing to really focus on some internal auditing and allow our contracted work to perform the full audit. And so it's gone very well and has been a good transition.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean, for that clarification. And Mike, do we move in now to the next item on the agenda? Anything else with John and Corinne?
Yes, sir, if that's possible. John and Corinne, you're welcome to hang around, but you probably have other things that you'd like to accomplish. Thank you again for your time. And Kevin, if we could switch over to have Mr. Stearns be the presenter, that would be great.
Good morning. The additional item that we have on the agenda for this morning is a proposed amendment to the city's long-term investment policy. It was sent to you this morning, a red line version compared to the old version. So you can look at that. Under state law, cities and towns can only invest in a very limited amount of particular investments, primarily money markets, U.S. treasuries, and things of that nature, unless the authorizing body of the city, meaning the city commission in this case, adopts a written investment policy. So we've adopted written investment policies for our pooled investment fund, for certain long-term investment funds. So the proposed amendments that we're showing you today are for our long-term funds. So to distinguish those, they're not the pension funds. The pension boards do their own investment policies under state law. It's not for the pooled investment fund, which is the bulk of other city assets, the operating funds. They are invested in a limited number of things. Particularly, they're not invested in equities. So the long-term funds that we're talking about, they're listed at the beginning of the investment policy, but they comprise about $25 to $30 million of the city's long-term assets. Things like the survivors benefit funds, the retirees health insurance fund, the cemetery fund, the public improvement endowment fund. So you have, as I said, a redlined version of this. Primarily what we've proposed is we are tweaking it. We have not looked at or made changes to this investment policy in quite some time. We've changed the limits on primarily the limits on certain categories. We lower or increase the limits slightly for small and mid-cap stocks. We decreased the allocation to international equities. We reduced the allocation to fixed income given the low rates on the fixed income side, which have been going on for quite some time. And we added an additional category with a small allocation to alternative strategies, things like hedge strategies, private equity. It includes real estate and a few other things. And that's consistent with what the pension funds have been doing for a number of years. So I would, I would characterize these as minor tweaks to a policy that we haven't looked at in some time. Under state law, what's required is that an ordinance be passed to codify the written policy. And that I'll leave it, defer to Palmer, but generally speaking, that requires 2 readings before the City Commission to adopt these particular changes. So with that, I'm happy to answer any individual questions. You have a red line version. Obviously, the first reading for this would be this coming Monday, a week from today, and then there would be a second reading at the end of April.
Mayor, you have a question? He's coming on.
I do. I'm sorry. I just had trouble getting my mic icon to come up. Jeff, you talked about the fact that I may have misunderstood that. What don't we use stocks for? What funds do we not invest stocks for? And then why are these investment parameters in here if we don't use them for this on a long-term basis?
Sure. In the pooled investment, I mean, obviously the pension funds are invested in equities, but the pooled investment fund, which comprises the bulk of, other city assets, $450 to $500 million, those are operating funds, and they are some reserve funds. But generally speaking, those we don't want those invested in equities because of the potential for a lot of volatility in the equity market and the value of those things going up and down to a significant degree. They're operating funds, and they need to be available to be used if we need them for operation. These long-term limited number of funds that we're talking about, up to about $30 million right now, they are truly long-term funds that are set aside for long-term purposes. So it's appropriate for them to be invested similar to the pension fund, including the investment in equities.
On the equity investment side this year, where the value stocks are exceeding the growth stocks, are we making any tweaks in that regard? And what are your thoughts with respect to the duration of that phenomena during the year?
I wish I could tell you when things were going to go up or go down in the equity markets. I would have my own private island if that was the case. I don't know the answer to that. We've certainly had quite a run. It's been one of those runs where everything is up, generally speaking. And the difference between growth stocks and value stocks, you haven't seen a lot of difference because this has been a rising flood, if you will, that's pushed everything up. I can't tell you when that's going to end. Certainly when we're thinking about these things in the pension funds, or for the employees' pension fund, which I sit on, and also when we work with our managers for these other smaller long-term funds, we give a lot of thought to where we are in a cycle, what the appropriate allocations are for growth versus value, and we will tweak those on occasion.
Commissioner Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and not being a part of, course, your committee, but sitting in, of course, to hear the report, I just wanted to share, as the mayor asked a question of Mr. Stearns, as I was in a meeting most of the week last week with FMI, Florida League of Cities, and what we call the Florida Municipal Insurance Trust Board, and talk about investments and those kind of things. And it was shared, as you just mentioned, I think, Mr. Stearns, that, you know, we can expect some increase, I think, as we move along in this year, coming out of COVID-19, and I believe we are. And with the current, because I know one of the questions asked about the current administration, meaning the Biden administration, and what kind of things we can expect when it comes to investment opportunities, as far as rates and those kind of things, either lower or higher. I think it was shared in that meeting that I was a part of it this past few days, last week rather. We can expect some increase. So I thought I'd make reference to that as you were sharing, as you were, Mr. Stearns, as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Walker, and it's great to have you join us this morning. So it's good to see someone outside the committee hop on. So Commissioner Salvage.
Thank you, Chad. A little off subject, Jeff, but since I've got you front and center here, in the wake of the hospital fund vote, I've received a number of questions about exactly how we're going to invest that money. And as everybody knows, this is not my strong point, so forgive me if I'm asking questions that I probably should know, but the questions I'm getting, will this $215 million, is it one of the smaller funds that you're talking about, or part of a larger investment fund? And I've had people say that our projected return on investment is not realistic. Can you address both of those, please?
Sure. I mean, I'll make an initial comment, and Mike may want to comment as well. Obviously, the funds that we're talking about today, the 30-ish million, that's one thing. The infusion of $215 million from the hospital payment sometime before the end of the fiscal year is obviously a much larger task. And to that end, you should see in the near future a proposal that Mike has previewed in previous commission meetings, which is to form a separate board to deal with the Public Improvement Endowment Fund, the $200 million that'll come in, plus the 12-ish million that's there now. Combine those, have them dealt with by a board, which would operate similar to the way the pension funds operate, so that we can put around that a more significant infrastructure, hire a separate financial advisor to advise on that. Because if I understand the intent correctly, it's to create basically what we would call a permanent fund, whereas we would use the earnings from such a fund to fund various things that the city does in the Public Improvement Fund and other transfers. But it would be to create a permanent fund, and a permanent fund probably deserves a separate board to think about it on a long-term basis. So right now, the Public Improvement Endowment Fund is controlled by this investment policy, but I think you'll see a separate proposal for a separate board and quite possibly a separate investment policy going forward that board might recommend, and that we would bring that ordinance or resolution to you in the very near future.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And the return on the investment?
Well, I'll let Mike.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Salvage, I couldn't agree more with everything Jeff has said. We are in the process of preparing a resolution to provide to the commission that establishes the Public Improvement Endowment Fund, its board. To Jeff's point, there'll be an investment policy. If all stars align, I'd like to try to have that blessed by the city manager and Palmer and Jeff today, such that it's ready for the next commission meeting. So we can get this established. We can prepare a request for proposal to find an investment manager qualified to manage the $215 million. Commissioner Salvage, you had asked about the rate of return. As Jeff noted, these monies will be invested similar to the way we invest our pension funds. Okay, the required rate of return in our general employees pension fund is 7.25%. Okay, ideally we will average that. Okay, we had said that, you know, to make this work, we would need to average 6% in the Public Improvement Endowment Fund. So anything above that should shore up those years when we don't see even 6%, which I can promise you there'll be those years, right? So if we can on average stay with at least 6% return, we'll be fine, as long as we don't, you know, dip into the corpus or spend more than we should in the Public Improvement Fund. And I know the city managers talked about that, about what we can do to continue to evaluate expenses in future years, over the next 10 years even, in the Public Improvement Fund. What can we improve to lower that dependency? So you know, there's never going to be a promise, sir, that we'll earn 6%. But on average, if we're not earning 6%, we have bigger problems, because that means our pension fund is not earning 6%, which means a tremendous cost increase for the city as well as the employees, sir. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you both.
Yes, sir.
City Manager Strauss.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner McLeod. I just want to highlight something that Mike just talked about to answer Commissioner Selvage's question. You know, when we presented the assumptions that we built in to that plan, they were really bundled together. And so kind of like Mike was talking about there are other opportunities that in those years where we may not, you know, we may fall a little short. We also had built in, you know, an estimated growth rate for those expenses. And so we can work on ways, you know, to fall below that growth rate, or, you know, to cut some of those expenses altogether if we have to. So it's really a combination to make it work. And Mike's math behind that was built that way.
Thank you. Commissioner Walker.
Not to prolong the subject, Mr. Chair, but if I may ask Mr. Brozart, how do you foresee the composition of the new board to be? And this could be premature. I'm not sure, but you mentioned that it would be a separate board to oversee. Would there be some kind of a diversity kind of options involved, where you have people from the community as well as others within the city operations to oversee or be a part of this board to oversee those dollars for that fund? Or again, my question could be premature.
Yes or no? Absolutely, good question. What we have talked about with the city manager is a 5-person board. It will be made up of your finance director, your assistant finance director, your treasurer, as well as 2 folks from the community. One will be designated by the city manager, and one will be designated by the mayor. Preferably someone that, you know, has knowledge and expertise in investments, and so that's the process that we plan to propose in the resolution. And again, that's part of the reason we want to go quickly. The hospital is in the process right now of working on their bonds. We do not know if they're going to, logic says they're going to borrow as soon as possible to take advantage of the lower rates now, versus what could be a perceived assumption that rates are going to go up as it gets closer to the October 1st deadline. So we have to do all that we can to have the RFP in place, have our investment manager in place, as well as the team of 5 to evaluate those RFPs as soon as possible. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the allowing me to ask that question.
Of course. Good question, Commissioner Walker. Mr. Mayor, did you have a point on that as well? Okay. Jeff, on a question, the ordinance that is before us, you mentioned that it's been some time since we've made any changes or tweaks. What led us to do this now? Is the restructuring allowing us to hit that 4% or greater? I'm just curious, kind of the rationale behind bringing it forward now to say it's time to make these updates.
Sure, I think it was probably overdue is number one, but at least part of the reason for it is when we were doing our year-end audit work, we realized that we had not looked at it in a period of time, and then when we started comparing it against the pension funds investment policies, which is kind of the closest model for what these funds are, we realized that there were some additions that we needed to make to keep up, basically.
Okay, that makes sense. That's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions for Jeff, Mike? Mike, do we vote on this, or are we voting on this as a committee?
Yes, sir. What you'll do is the Finance Committee will vote to adopt both the audit as well as these changes, and then it'll be endorsed during the Finance Committee portion of the next agenda that you have. Palmer will be providing the changes in an ordinance, as Jeff noted, which will be 2 readings.
Palmer, did you have any?
Approval on both, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Have a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion by the committee?
One question,
Mr. Mayor?
which would be, Mr. Davis, the ordinance you have is the final draft of what you're proposing, correct?
That's correct. We need to change one date on the attachment. The effective date will be April 19th.
All right.
So it is 2 readings.
Okay.
Okay. Good question. All right. All those in favor, raise your hand. Passes unanimously. Mike, City Manager, anything else for the committee?
I would just like to thank you for making the time on something other than an agenda study day. We try to keep these to those days. We appreciate your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you for your work, Mike, and your team, department heads, city management staff. It's a great report, and look forward to sharing this out with the rest of the commission very soon. Have a great Monday. Good week, everyone. We'll see you soon. Meeting's adjourned.